In 2004, the original Saw film took the world by storm, where a sequel was greenlit immediately after the first film's opening weekend. The first film earned so much money that the producers needed a script immediately, but James Wan and Leigh Whannell, the director and writer of Saw, were working on Universal Pictures' Dead Silence at the time. That's where music video director Darren Lynn Bousman came in, having completed a script for his first feature film, The Desperate, and was trying to sell it to studios, but was getting reactions that the script was very similar to Saw. A German studio eventually approached him with an offer to produce the film for $1 million. Just as they were looking for a cinematographer, the American cinematographer David A. Armstrong, who had worked on Saw, arrived on the scene and suggested showing the script to Saw producer Greg Hoffman. Hoffman then read the script and called Bousman, wanting to produce The Desperate. Bousman was initially upset when he heard about his script's similarities to Saw, and feared at first that Lionsgate's call was due to the complaints of plagiarism. However, after Hoffman eventually showed the script to his partners Mark Berg and Oren Coles, the two decided that The Desperate was the starting script they needed for Saw 2, and 2 months later, Bousman was flown to Toronto to direct. Saw 2 this time around was given a larger production budget of $4 million compared to Saw's budget of a little over $1 million. The marketing budget was an additional $2 million, and the first shot, which involved shooting police cars and a SWAT van driving around the industrial docklands outside the soundstage, was filmed on April 29th in 2005. Principal photography took place over 25 days in Toronto from May 2nd, 2005 to June 6, 2005. The film was initially given a 21 days to be shot, and the nerve gas house scenes were shot in an abandoned warehouse in Toronto, and the actors who played the Jigsaw victims there worked 16 hours each day. At the time of filming, in addition to having an on-set tutor for 2 hours, Erik Knudsen caught the flu, so he filmed his part while sick, which he then used actually due to his character's apparent poisoning throughout the film. The ending was then filmed on May 25th and 26th, the music and sound was recorded in July, and Saw 2 was locked on July 16th, and it was eventually finished by September 9th. Saw 2 then had an opening with over $31 million at the domestic box office across 2,900 theaters. The 3-day Halloween opening weekend set a Lionsgate record. It became at the time the widest release for the distributor and one of the best opening weekends for a horror sequel in history. The film eventually grossed $87 million in the United States and Canada and $60.7 million in other markets for a worldwide total of $147.7 million worldwide gross at the box office in 2005. And Tobin Bell eventually went on to actually win the Best Villain Award at the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards. So that's pretty cool. So if you didn't know, I'm going through all of the Saw movies leading up to Saw X, and I am talking about every single entry in the series, however many years later. Talking about each film respectively from their due release points. Considering we're talking about Saw 2 today, 18 years later, I'll only be talking about Saw 2 18 years later and not talking about any of the other sequels, at least trying not to, for this video, because I want to review these movies as they are respectively from what came beforehand and what they were at that point, and rather comparing them as a franchise and what came later. Saw 2, in my opinion, is one of the best Saw movies that we have gotten. Out of the roughly 9 movies we have now, I'd put it personally at the number 3 spot, behind the original and another film which I'll obviously talk about in the coming weeks. Saw 2, in my opinion, did everything right as far as a horror sequel goes. It ramps everything up to 11, it improves upon everything that the first one did for the most part in regards to bigger traps, more gory sequences, but also understanding the characters, this world, and also the motive of Jigsaw just that little bit more, and how clouded and hypocritical he actually is, because the first film, as I said in my first video, is one where you don't necessarily get a good idea of what his motives, his ideology, and what he really stands for, and what he really means or attempts to do. In here, we get a better idea as to what he is trying to do. Here, we get a better idea and understanding of his morals and ideologies. But I want to go through Saw 2 little by a dot points this time of what things I want to talk about, because in the first video it was a lot of rambling, it was a lot of me sort of figuring out things on the fly, remembering things about the movie and then eventually talking about them. My Saw 3 video with a very special guest is pretty much going to be a very similar situation to that first movie. Yeah, I want to bring on collaborators for these videos to talk about these movies, people that I know are also passionate about Saw. But I want to do the singular reviews going forward as, you know, with dot points that are a little bit unfiltered, but they are little things like the story, the characters, and everything like that, the traps. I want to go through them little by little and talk about them, not necessarily with notes to each category, but I want to go through each category little by little to make it a little bit more constructed, and talking about the film, how it holds up 18 years later, and also what it does as a sequel to the film that came beforehand. Because the story of Saw 2 is phenomenal. I actually think the way that it's written is very good, considering the movie literally opens up with an opening trap. This is our first introduction introduction to an opening trap, of which has been a staple of the franchise ever since. And it's a very effective way to open this movie, considering that in the first movie, it was just Adam waking up in the bathtub, us getting introduced to our main two characters, and eventually going through the nitty-gritty of things with the story. Here, we are right back into it 12 months after the release of the first movie, and you can tell immediately that this movie has a bigger budget thanks to the opening sequence. And immediately starting off that way, it lets certain story aspects tie into each other, with Erik Matthews and Detective Carey eventually coming to the scene of that grisly opening trap, and therefore we get on our way with our little game, or our little story, I should say, and having it be a story around two main games, I should say, being the one with Erik Matthews and the cops, where they are sitting with Jigsaw, and the one where there is the main trap plot with the nerve gas house, is a very interesting way to tell this story. It provides for a good twist, which I'll talk about a little later as well. But I feel personally that this movie having two simultaneous games, and one of them being more psychological and one of them being more gory and trap-centric, it provides the best combination possible for the two elements that worked best in the original movie, because the original movie definitely had its gory traps, but they were more off-camera, they were more off-kilter, mainly due to the lower budget that the film had, but this one had a higher budget, so it had the avenue to go further and beyond with two different plots involving one of Jigsaw's games. One of them with Erik Matthews, where if he wants to see his son again, all he has to do is sit there and talk to John, understand him, and in reality, if he had just done that, he would have been able to take Jigsaw away in handcuffs right then and there, whether he's a cancer patient or not. But he's being tested due to the type of cop he is. And then you've also got the trap plot, which goes towards Jigsaw's ideology of despising murderers, taking advantage of the vulnerable, those wanting for a way out and everything, such as Xavier, who was a drug dealer, Arby Tate, who would ruin lives, which confirmed in the Saw 2 director's commentary. You actually find out he's an arsonist, which makes his trap very ironic with the furnace. But I feel having two main plots, one of which is a psychological game between the cops and Jigsaw, and one of them, which is our main trap plot with the nerve gas house, is a very interesting way to tell the narrative, especially when we as the audience think that the cops are watching live footage of the trap game that is currently being played. And not only that, all these people that are in this game were criminals, rightfully so. All of them did terrible things. Addison was a prostitute, Jonas was apparently a gang member, Arby Tate was he was an arsonist, Xavier was a drug dealer. He was a drug dealer. He ruined people for that. And not only that, you also had Daniel Matthews, who was a kid more or less deserving of going to juvie, but because of his father, he was always let out. And not only that, apparently, according to the official Saw wiki, Daniel was 17 years old. He was eligible for juvie, which the actor, by the way, called to see him in Scream 4 afterwards. Knowing that Erik Matthews had wrongfully framed and, planted evidence to put all these people in prison, even though they are real criminals, they did terrible things, but they were framed due to Erik Matthews' methods as a police officer, it makes the two games simultaneously very tense, because you know that this guy, Daniel, is in a game with a lot of people that really don't like his father, and therefore it makes the game more personal for both himself, the people in the game, and also Erik Matthews himself. Having the two simultaneous games simultaneously, having them being simultaneous and then taking place roughly at the same time in the events of the movie, but then it's figured out later that that's not the case. We'll talk about that a little later. But it crafts a very tense and very, visceral story that does have a commentary on the bad cops that are out there, because there are a ton of bad cops out there. And Erik Matthews is a commentary on that. His impatience, his battery, his planting of evidence, him doing anything to get a conviction, even though it might not be by the book. Donnie Wahlberg plays the character of Erik Matthews very fucking well. I just think what they do with Saw 2 to have a very simplistic story, one that is also very meaningful with a lot of commentary behind it, is done very well in this movie. The best Saw movies, in my opinion, are the ones that have a sort of commentary about it regarding whether it's medical with Saw 6, whether it's cops in Spiral or Saw 2 in regards to doctors and just who we are in a society like in Saw 1. And I'll say it, I'll talk more about it with my friend in Saw 3, but grieving over a family and neglecting those that love you and you love as well, like in Saw 3. Like, seriously, Saw 3 still has a lot of issues, but it does a lot right as well. Saw 2 just has a very intense, very impactful story that is made very clear and very apparent and very interesting and fun to watch through its two basically simultaneous games, in my opinion. And for that, it's also very fast-paced and never boring. And also the direction and cinematography from, at one point, music video director Darren Lynn Bousman, who was trying to write another film that had a lot of similarities to Saw, When he did Saw 2, it then personified the style of the early Saw movies. This very green, very dirty look to these movies. And also, that was a thing for the budget I have a feeling for. And it also had a style to it because of that. The very flashy, very high frame rate editing that was involved with the trap sequences, the very grungy and grindhouse look to these movies made it feel very uncomfortable as well. And this is the movie, in my opinion, through the cinematography and Darren Lynn Bousman's direction, that personified that stylistic choice when it comes to this franchise that was very apparent all the way from Saw 1 through to Saw 7. But I feel personally that Saw 2 was the one that personified that style in stone for this franchise. And probably why, visually speaking, Jigsaw and Spiral don't necessarily feel visually or tonally on a visual scale like a Saw film. Now, let's talk about Jigsaw in this movie, because he is a very sadistic fuck in this movie in regards to just how he talks to Eric Matthews, the rest of the cops, and what he is getting at, but it also gives us a better idea as his ideology and also his methodology in this film and what his morals as the Jigsaw killer actually are. But there are so many memorable lines that give us a better understanding as to Jigsaw's morals and also his ideology in this movie, of which Jigsaw was fairly irrelevant, as I said, in that first movie. He is not the focal point. His ideology, his focus on his methodology is not a central focus of the first film. That doesn't matter, but here, it is one of the true ground elements to this narrative and also him as a character.
Those who do not appreciate life do not deserve life.
My son appreciates his life.
But do you appreciate yours? Do you appreciate your sons? Can you imagine what it feels like to have someone sit you down and tell you that you're dying? The clock's ticking for you. In a split second, your ore is cracked open. You look at things differently, smell things differently. You savor everything, be it a glass of water or a walk in the park. But most people have the luxury of not knowing when that clock's going to go off, and the irony of what it is that keeps them from really living their life, if it keeps them drinking that glass of water but never really tasting it.
It's lines like those that he gives to Eric Matthews that are really symbolic of what he is meaning and what his methodology is, what his ideology is, what he is wanting to do with every single one of his victims. He is wanting people to appreciate their lives, those who have committed convictions, those who have done wrong by other people or even by themselves, those that do not deserve life because of them taking advantage and for granted the blessings that they have been given at birth. Those who have everything or could do more for the world themselves rather than tear people down and give them false hope when looking for something like drugs to make them feel better. He tests them to really appreciate their wrongdoings and puts them in tests that test them, not just their survival instincts, but also what they have been doing. Is it the right thing to do? Now you understand through what I feel. Feel what I feel, see what I see. What I am doing to you is what you have been doing to all these people all along.
The jigsaw piece that I cut out for my subjects was only ever meant to be a symbol that the subject was missing something, a vital piece of the human puzzle. The survival instinct. I want to play a game.
And the riddles and everything that he provides is really a test on the survival instinct. The riddles he provides in regards to the test, one in regards to the numbers in the back of their mind over the rainbow. Like, what was that line again? Here we go. You all possess the combination to the safe. Think hard, the numbers are in the back of your mind. The clue to that order can be found over the rainbow. Like, the riddles he provides feels very methodical. It's all to test their survival instinct, it feels like, but in the meantime, putting them in torturous contraptions like the needle pit, like the razor box, like the furnace, where it is all catered to what they did. When it came to the razor box, I actually don't fucking understand. I've never looked that deep into the razor box, aside from how to possibly survive it, which there is literally a lock and key at the very fucking top. Good job, Addison. You suck. But when it comes to the needle pit, Xavier on the tape was revealed to be a drug addict. In the director's commentary for Saw 2, you find out that R.B. Tate was, well, he was an arsonist. Which, by the way, you can see R.B. Tate very briefly in the background of the flashback in Saw 3 with Jill Tuck and, John. Fun fact. The thing is that makes him so hypocritical but also so terrifying of a villain is something I pointed out in the first video. And that is that John is a character who is very hypocritical. He is very contrived. He is very conflicted. He constantly puts people in these tests and does things to them of which he is judging them for, which I guess is the point. And I don't know if that's down to good writing or bad writing, but it elevates it nonetheless that his hypocrisy for his tests and what he is doing. He's committing the same convictions of which he is judging, testing these people for in the first place. Him putting them in these traps, him kidnapping them. He is committing terrible felonies right here, whether they are criminals or not. He is doing things that the transcrepancies that he is judging them for, he is committing the same convictions, which makes John, or Jigsaw, a very conflicting but also very fascinating villain all at the same time. And I've talked about the traps in Saw 2 that many times over the years as well, because I did an entire video series on how to beat Saw. Go check them out, I actually really like those videos still. But in Saw 2, they've got some of the best traps in the entire series in my opinion. Say what you will about how simplistic the traps still are in this movie, they are effective in things that we all fear. Like, yeah, the Venus flytrap at the beginning of the movie with Mike is horrifying. Something so terrifying to behold and witness and go through. Considering it is a guy who has a death mask who has stitches under his eye where a key has been locked behind. Like, he has to either cut the stitches or he has to cut through his eyeball, which Saw 2 Flesh and Blood, the video game, confirmed that you could have just essentially cut the stitches and reached in and grabbed out the key, because the opening trap of Saw 2 Flesh and Blood is that very test. Except Saw 2 Flesh and Blood is nowhere near as fucking good. That game sucks. But then you got the razor box with Addison, which we don't know what that tape said. What was even... You know what? What was on the tape for Addison in Saw 2? What was on Addison's tape in Saw 2? We don't actually ever find out that what was on her tape in the razor box, but it says here, after finding out about their connection, Addison decided to look for the antidote on her own, severely weakened by the gas. She eventually stumbled into a room with a large glass box suspended from the ceiling by 4 chains. A syringe with the antidote was glued to the bottom of the box. She found another envelope with a mini cassette, but threw it away as she didn't have the recorder with her. Instead, she tried to grab the antidote by inserting her hand in one of the 2 holes on the bottom of the box. However, she accidentally pulled off the upper part of the syringe and therefore spilled the antidote. Ridden by fear and desperation, she put her other hand in the second hole. Unfortunately, there were razor-sharp blades placed above the holes, which now prevented her from pulling her arms back out. Therefore, Addison started to cry and scream for help. By following her voice, Xavier eventually reached the room. However, he wasn't interested in helping her, but in something else. He had discovered that they all had numbers written on the back of their necks. Those were part of the combination to the safe and starting room. Instead of helping Addison, Xavier merely checked her number, a blue 9. After obtaining it, Xavier slowly walked out of the room and closed the door behind him while Addison desperately yelled at him. Eventually, she succumbed to her wounds and died. This is a horrifying trap, like, seriously, and due to how weakened she is by the nerve gas, I guess no one can really blame her for being so stupid and putting her second hand in, or rather than opening up the blades and all that sort of stuff. Like, you only really needed one, but she used 2 hands and put them in the separate holes. But at the same time, you can't really blame her for being delusional and stupid in that situation, considering her fear and desperation. But we never actually find out what is on her tape. On RB Tate's, it is confirmed that he actually helped kidnap the victims a part of this, and that's another reason why he went in. There was one syringe for himself, one that is a gift to him for helping kidnap the others, and then there was another one for whom he would give to at his own free will. But then the furnace closes, he dies, and in hell, only the devil can save ya. He doesn't turn the valve in time. Xavier, well, he's a drug dealer, so the syringe pit was for him. He throws Amanda in there. He's a fucking coward, but granted, I wouldn't want to be in there either, even though I like needles. I think needles are fascinating. I've always watched them whenever I get a blood test. But something that was very apparent even in the first movie was how Jigsaw would literally have riddles and also puzzle pieces hidden in plain fucking sight that none of us could see. You get what I mean? More or less in regards to Saw 1 with the flammable jelly trap with the combination on the fucking wall. How was anyone meant to decipher that? And then when it came to the nerve gas house, the numbers on the back of the mind, where the order can be found over the rainbow. Like, it took until the end of the movie for Xavier to essentially figure out what that fucking meant, and I don't think we even know the order of the numbers yet. We don't know what Amanda and Daniel's numbers were. We still don't. We don't even know what Xavier's number was. We knew what all the other ones were, so we can decipher what kind of the combination was, but we don't know what the actual combination is. Because as you can see right here, trivia, given the number revealed, the combination of the safe would be 2, unknown, 16, 11, 9, 8, unknown, unknown, 8. The orange number was never revealed, and it's not clear whether Laura's number is indigo or violet. So therefore, we have like 2 missing numbers or 3 missing numbers, and at the same time, we also do not know what if it was indigo or violet for, well, Laura, we know what a number was, which was 8, but we don't know if it was indigo or violet, so we don't know what order it went. Was it before the unknown at the end, or was it after the unknown at the end? We don't know. Then, of course, we've got the twist. This movie kind of has 2 twists, one of them being the fact that the game isn't live. They're not watching live footage. This is all a playback video that the test was taken days ago, with Daniel Matthews and everyone else. Xavier, Arby, Amanda, you name it. They all took place days prior. And we can sort of see that when Erik Matthews walks into the nerve gas house and there are very decayed bodies already. So you can kind of tell that this isn't happening simultaneously anymore. Like, it's just not. But that was one twist, and it was very good. Also, Jigsaw being like,
he's in a safe place.
When referring to Daniel Matthews, the little prick meant it. He was in a safe place. He was just locked in a safe with an oxygen tank, and if Erik had just sat there and talked to John until the timer ran out, as was advised, he would have seen his son again.
All you have to do is sit here and talk to me, and you will see your son again.
But at the moment he beat John,
Game over. I'll take you to the house.
like, he lost the game right there by doing exactly what John advised him not to fucking do and what he was testing him for. He is as bad as John made him out to be, and John was right in a way. Although John is still a criminal. He's still a murderer. But then there's the second twist. After Erik Matthews was kidnapped and, injected by a syringe and passed out, he was shackled in the bathroom from the first movie, which we also saw the return of earlier when Xavier was killed in Saw 2. There's the fact that Amanda turning up as the apprentice is not entirely all that surprising. There are plenty of signs throughout Saw 2. And while I may have been slightly surprised the first time I saw it, it's nothing that really surprised me like the first movie. Its twist, it's not nearly as effective in my opinion, but it's still very effective, still really well done, and I think it has, again, one of the better twists in the Saw series in my opinion. Saw 2 is a damn good sequel. It does everything a sequel should be. It's not necessarily better than the original movie, but it ups everything to 11. It improves on a lot of aspects in regards to production value due to its higher budget. The performances are a lot better this time around. The narrative is a lot tighter and a lot more intense as well and faster paced. I just don't think it's nearly as saying as the first movie, if you know what I'm trying to get at. Like, I don't think it's as effective nor memorable in the long run. Like, the first movie was just tried and true and everything in regards to what it actually represented and what it meant, what it could be. Whereas the second movie plays over the first one very well as a sequel companion piece, but it's not necessarily better and doesn't improve on a lot of the overall effective narrative aspects. Like, it's got a better story in the sense of pacing and characters, but not necessarily a better story in the sense of memorability and overall effectiveness. It's got some of the best traps in the entire series. Daniel Matthews, I'd like to see him return one day. He's still alive. After Jigsaw died, in the events of Jigsaw, he'd be like 27, 28 years old at that point, because it's 10 years after Jigsaw's death. So, yeah, guys, that was Saw 2. I know these videos are a little bit rambly and a little bit messy, but I just want to talk about them unfiltered, mostly without notes, and talking about them, my passion, and how they hold up all these years later. I think Saw 2 holds up brilliantly all these years later. It is such a good sequel, one of the better and best performing horror sequels at the time. It is such a good entry in this series. It is still one of the best entries in the entire Saw series as a whole, in my opinion. It is easily, like, maybe third best. It's easily top 3, like, no question in my mind about that one. But next up, we've got Saw 3, guys, and my opinion has slightly changed since I last reviewed it back in 2021. Look out for that video coming very, very soon. Thank you all so much for watching. Look out for more videos and content, whether it's Saw, movie reactions, TV show reactions, and regular movie reviews coming very, very soon. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.